let's go ahead and get started on the presentation today. I just want to remind everyone we want this conversation between Vivek and myself and with you all in the audience to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to ask questions as we're going along in the Q&A panel, and then Vivek and I will address those questions later on after the presentation. And today we'll be discussing what common fraud types we're seeing in the market on the Ekata side, some of the impact that we've seen from COVID on the digital world, and then talk about kind of how you can use sophisticated data science to really help you better understand not only who your customers are, but also how their information is being used online. We'll also take a look at how other payments companies are leveraging our identity verification data to help increase kind of fraud detection rates, reduce chargebacks, and increase their brand reputation and customer loyalty, assessing the lower risk customers and making sure that we kind of look at things both on both sides of the coin, both good customers and bad customers as a whole. So for starters, we thought that it would be valuable to hear from the audience, from you guys. And so we wanted to understand, as the world is becoming increasingly reliant on digital and fraud attacks are becoming more sophisticated, what fraud types that you're seeing in your organization today. So we will go ahead and kick that poll off, and I'll give everyone a couple minutes to submit their answers.
Very good. On your screen, you should see the first polling question for today. What are your biggest fraud challenges? The options are account protection, transaction fraud, promo abuse, synthetic identity, merchant onboarding, or payment authentication. We'll give everybody about 10 more seconds to pick the option they feel is the best fit. Some results are still coming in, but at this time we have 15% of attendees selecting account protection, 62% selecting transaction fraud, 8% selecting synthetic identity, and 15% selecting merchant onboarding. All right, back to you.
Thanks, Trevor. These are really interesting results, and I think fairly consistent with what we've been seeing across our data as well. Vivek, I'd love to hear from you in your conversations with customers. Is this fairly consistent with what you've been seeing and hearing in the market?
Yeah, this is very consistent, Stacy, from what we have seen from our vantage point. Talking to customers during COVID period, the number of digital transactions has grown for almost all of our customers. And seeing the transaction fraud is top of mind of this audience, it kind of just reemphasizes that. Account protection is another area where we have seen customers having some concerns on not being 100% ready. Merchant onboarding is another area. So yes, this is very consistent with what we have heard from our customers.
Awesome. Thanks for that perspective. And it seems like there's a lot of companies that have just a lot to juggle these days when considering these different types of fraud, especially as these different fraud types, I'm sure, are evolving and kind of a moving target during this post-pandemic world. Can we talk more about like managing customer expectations and I guess business expectations in terms of keeping up with the speed and frictionless experiences that customers are demanding while having to obviously carry a heavy responsibility in protecting consumer personal data? Can you talk more about how companies are protecting themselves from fraudsters exploiting their business while meeting those needs of their consumers?
Absolutely. Fraud risk is just one piece of the puzzle for our customers. They're always trying to juggle between, stopping fraud, but at the same time, how do you not add too much friction for your customers? So there are two sides of the coin here. Identifying low-risk customers is just as valuable as identifying the high-risk customers. It is a challenge for our customers. And upfront, it allows us to be better tailor customer workflows to meet those expectations that we have met earlier. No consumer likes to be asked for additional verification or likes to be rejected during a transaction. What we have seen can lead to a poor customer experience and can ultimately damage a company's reputation and brand. And it impacts highly to the customer lifetime value. both of which can be very detrimental for companies. So this is a very hard balancing act that our customers have to do. And in particular, as the world is becoming increasingly reliant on digital as a result of the pandemic, we see that the customer expectations haven't changed. People still expect the same experience, speed that they were provided pre-COVID days. And in practical terms, how many times have you heard your neighbor or friend complain about deliveries being delayed as a result of high demand? Yet, this still doesn't temper their expectations. So, though we live in a changed world, this balancing act that our customers have to do has just increased in volume for our customers.
It's funny, Vivek, that you mentioned the piece around neighbors or friends complaining about slow delivery times, because that's something I've definitely heard from maybe a friend or a coworker as well. Awesome. And on the topic of COVID, again, I think this is a great time for us to hear from you as well, the audience. We'd love to hear just how you're seeing changes in consumer behavior as a result of COVID-19. So I think we'll go back to another poll here. Trevor, do you want to kick off this poll as well?
Absolutely. On your screen, you should see the second poll for today's session. What changes are you seeing in consumer behavior as a result of COVID? The options are consumer shift to value and essentials, rise in consumption, consumer pullback on spending, and no remarkable changes. Again, select the option you feel is the best fit. We will reveal results in about 10 seconds. All right, some results are still coming in, but at this time, 50% of attendees have selected consumer shift to value and essentials. 25% have seen a rise in consumption. 19% have seen consumer pullback on spending, and 6% have seen no remarkable changes. Back to you.
Thanks, Trevor. It's really interesting to see the results of this poll. I know internally at Ekata, our CFO had kind of done an analysis around what trends we're seeing across our data, and it's really interesting to see the industry shift and customer focus and what they're relying on as essentials during this time. So very interesting to see that response. Thanks everyone for participating. Vivek, based off of some of these results and what we're seeing internally, can you share how some of these changes in consumer behavior have impacted our approach to product and planning and strategy?
Yeah, I was reading the poll feedback, and what is at the top is consumer shift to value and essentials, which is just reiterating the point that I was trying to make earlier. I mean, more and more of e-commerce, more and more of transactions are shifting online. Even though it is shifting online, consumer continues to seek for value in those interactions with our customers. And this becomes even more important for Ekata, because Ekata is a key part of our customers' waterfall when they are verifying a customer's transaction. So we do recognize that, and in the past few months, we have accelerated our investment in our identity verification products, and you will see some of that in the following slides. And I am generally very excited on what we are doing for Ekata, and we are seeing that it resonates well with our customer base as well. Exactly on this slide, if you see it, in the last quarter itself, we released a new API endpoint, which is account opening API. This API is meant to track on taking action on high-risk accounts to mitigate losses from synthetic identity fraud. We know this is one of the fraud vector that affects account opening scenario a lot. So this API is meant to solve for those use cases. We did an iteration on transaction risk API. So going back to the first poll result, where top of mind for a lot of the audience is transaction fraud, we realized that transaction risk API has been out for a while. It is meant to maximize approval rates while fighting transaction fraud. That's the use case, the balancing act that we want to do on behalf of our customers. We did a rev on it. We released a Transaction Risk 2.0 that now has new network attributes, and we added secondary responses for email and phone to help our digital goods customer. So those were some of the feedback that we had received on the first version of Transaction Risk. So we iterated on that. And so updates help alleviate transaction and payment fraud for companies. Theft is on the rise given the economic crisis as a result of COVID. So it is important that companies are protecting both their business and customers during this time. We also released address risk API. So this is when, especially for physical good customers, if your customers are shipping to an address, you would want to know the risk associated with that address. There are various ways sophisticated fraudsters would work around that. So this address risk API helps solve for such use cases. Pro Insight, it is our manual review solution where you can review every single transaction and make your decision based on the relationship with the identity elements that's present, so namely name, phone, email, IP, and address. And you can also look at the behavioral aspect of it. So this is where you can look at whether this identity is being used for fraudulent purposes or not. It can especially be helpful for account takeover scenarios.
Thanks, Vivek. And Vivek had mentioned our network or a network, and let's go ahead and just kind of unpack that a little bit. So each of the products that Vivek just kind of ran through are powered by what we call the Ekata Identity Engine, which is comprised of two data sets, our identity graph and our identity network, that are really working together to paint a more holistic and clearer picture of both who the consumer that you're dealing with is, and then again, how their information is being used online. So that's kind of what Vivek was mentioning earlier around behavioral insight. So combining these two data sets with data science, our identity engine is really providing powerful and unique data insights through these APIs and the SaaS tool to help you make more accurate risk decisions about your customers and make sure that you're mitigating fraud risk at scale. Vivek, anything to add?
Exactly. Yeah, Stacy. We built a network because we felt like the identity graph, which is one of the two sources of data efficacy in our products, only was capturing half of the picture, right? So graph, which has linkages about person's name, email, phone, address, and IP, and so on, is very effective in catching the synthetic identity behavior. But as we rely on digital goods and services more and more these days, we also realize that identity theft is continuing to grow, and access to stolen PII is becoming increasingly prevalent. A fraudster could very well steal all my PII and use it across multiple transactions and appear like me without a business realizing it wasn't actually me. The identity graph validates personal attributes and identity elements to make sure they are valid or a match to other entities, whereas network tells us if these elements are being used in a typical or anomalous fashion. So that's the key use case with which we built identity network, and now that we are now starting to unravel it in all our products.
Thanks, Vivek. And I think on a more practical level, if we look at things from an element perspective, this is kind of that side-by-side view of how we're looking at elements within the identity graph versus the identity network. Quick note here, our data is really focused around kind of 5 core elements. So that's name, phone, email, IP, and address, as Heather mentioned earlier. So within each of these data sets, we're looking at both the validity of the elements on the left side in the graph, as well as how those elements are being used by consumers online. So the graph can tell us whether an email actually belongs to the person, who it might be linked to, whereas the network will manifest whether or not this email was first used, 365 days ago or yesterday, or it was last used a month ago versus 200 so days ago. Another piece that we'll look at is the validity of an address, and now down to kind of a specific level, so we can tell you whether or not an address is valid down to the street number or sorry, the unit number or the street, if it's a residential address. And then on the flip side, on the network, we would look at how many times has this address been used in the last 90 days. And then another example of this would be looking at a phone number and learning kind of what type of phone that might be, whether it's a landline or a fixed VoIP kind of scenario, or sorry, not VoIP, but the network would also reveal to us how that phone has been used across 50 different email addresses, or has been associated with 50 different email addresses in transactions that we're seeing across the network. And let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into the network specifically. Vivek, do you want to walk through this slide?
Sure. So if we take a look at those same elements and how they are being used online, we get a different view of my digital identity. In the network, we can see at how many identity elements are being used online, whether by me or by a fraudster. We use the network, which is made up of over roughly 400 million queries, or more than that, monthly, from real-world transactions to derive activity patterns and understand how my identity elements are actually being used in the digital world. That is the insight that we didn't have, or we haven't exposed to our customers before, and now we're starting to unravel that. A fraudster can use my data, but they don't act like me, right? Because let's say I shop 3 times a month in the online world, whereas if a fraudster is using my identity, they may change their online behavior, right? They may shop much higher than what I generally shop. They may shop with many different shipping addresses or shipping email than I generally do. I just have one email that I use, or 1 or 2 emails that I use. I just have one address that I use. But a fraudster will use my identity in a very different way. And that is what network is designed to catch. Anyone who has been a victim of fraud knows fraudsters, will try to use stolen data many times within a short time frame. My wife's Skype ID got hacked a few months back, and within 10 minutes, there were like 25 transactions using that ID. So that they tend to maximize on a stolen identity, and then they move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And that is what a network is created to solve for, right? Identify such behaviors, and then help our customers learn from it as well. They tend to use different combinations of identity elements just to see if they can somehow bypass authorization. So they're being crafty, and we are trying to stop that from happening by using our network and how the identity elements interact within our network.
And Vivek, you mentioned real-world queries. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? How is the network formed? Is it a global network? Yeah.
I think the key piece of the network is how many interactions do we really see monthly, daily, and is it global or not? That's how the customers will derive value from it. So as you can see, we have over 10 billion identity elements in our network. And all our data is global. We are active in pretty much every country out there, and the network is growing really fast at 400 million queries every month. There's a typo here, and our network data is provided by our customers who are operating globally as well. So we have around more than 1,500 customers that participate in the network. We are not like consortiums in the industry, where companies may create approved, unapproved lists or label identity elements as fraud. But our approach is slightly different. And what it allows for us to apply machine learning and then identify the good and bad activity to tailor to our customers' needs and use cases. I also want to note that this is completely separate from our identity graph, so they don't commingle. Identity graph is created from authoritative sources. That's what we use to create linkages. And then we use data science to curate, corroborate, and connect the links between the digital and physical attributes for identity resolution in our graph. Whereas network is built from our customers' digital transaction. When they call us to get insights, they leave a footprint, and that is what we use to derive network activity patterns.
Thanks, Vivek. And we talked about good and bad activity. Can you tell us more about what lenses you're evaluating or qualifying, I guess, good versus bad?
Yeah, sure. I kind of alluded to it in the previous slides as well, but we primarily look at four major patterns. There's more, of course, but these are the four major patterns that we kind of deep dive on. One is velocity. So how often have we seen an identity in transactions in the last 30 days, last 24 hours, last 90 days, and so on and so forth. And also look at anomaly in velocity. So, for example, if you are someone who transacts every 3 transactions every month, and then all of a sudden now that has gone up to 30, we look at that anomaly in behavior as well from velocity perspective. Popularity is where we look at your activity across our customer base. So typically, you may shop at 1 or 2 of our customer base, but if we are seeing a heightened activity around your identity, that would mean something like now your identity is active around 10 different merchants or more than that. Volatility is where we look at different permutations of these identity elements together. So typically, I shop. I have 1 shipping address, 1 billing address, 1 phone number, 1 or 2 email, and of course 1 name. So with that, my behavior is pretty much consistent. But then when you look at the fraudulent activities, you would see number of shipping addresses are different, number of shipping emails are different, more than 1, which is being associated with that. More than 1 phone is being associated with that identity. It kind of typically tells that it is an anomalous behavior, right? And sometimes that can help us catch this account takeover situations. Age maturity is another aspect now that we look at very closely. What we have seen is email first seen is one of the most predictive attribute. It helps us understand the stability of that email and also how much trust you have on that email. So we look at that first and last in behavior across all the identity elements. So whether it's email, phone, address, and the combinations of that. So we'll look at that as well. So these are the different pivots under which within our network, we look at the activity patterns to see if there is anomalous behavior. And then our customers can get the benefit of that through different network attributes that we are exposing.
Thanks, Vivek. And I think it's really interesting to look at things not only on like an isolated siloed level for these specific patterns, but also just in combination with one another. Can you speak to practical examples of just like different combinations of how this could look in the real world?
Yeah, this is a very good example. Combining these patterns together, we can see how a good consumer's information versus a fraudster's personal detail is getting used. For instance, a good customer buys from favorite store 3 times per month. On average, shops at 4 stores per month, uses the same email, phone, and shipping address, and their primary email address was first seen 380 days ago because he didn't need to keep on creating new email addresses. On the flip side, a fraudster may place dozens of orders within minutes of each other, run fake identity through many merchants because they're trying to maximize, use synthetic IDs but same shipping address. They keep changing the identity combinations, and their primary email might not have been seen before, right? They just created it for the fraudulent purposes. So this is a good way to visualize how network can catch a good behavior versus a fraudulent behavior.
Thanks, Vivek. Just to take a step back a little bit, I want to just comment really quickly on kind of where this data comes from, and we've chatted about real-world transaction intelligence. Security is obviously very paramount to us here at Ekata. We very much recognize the immense responsibility of handling not only our customers' data, which is businesses, but then the consumers' data as well from a downstream perspective. And I do want to just mention that, we make sure that any transaction data cannot be traced back to a customer, and that all inbound query sources are obfuscated. And then from a PII perspective, and Vivek will go into a little further detail about how this works exactly in the next slide, but we do one-way hash all of our PII data using National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and then also GDPR-approved hashing algorithms. And we very much value our data from a global perspective as well, so we are always ensuring that we're following any kind of compliance, regulatory compliance from a global perspective. Vivek, can you speak to kind of the hashing and how that works exactly?
Yeah, I think when you talk about network, I think one of the primary concerns that our customers had was, how do you secure network? How do you ensure that our transactions are secured, and even if a breach happens, from that perspective, we are in safe hands. So the first thing first, network is completely encrypted, and then we hash it using SHA-2 algorithm, the NIST approved algorithm for pseudonymizing our network. So nothing in our network is nothing PII in our network is stored in plain text. It is all hashed, including your name, your email, your IP, your phone, and address. But in order for us to hash everything and still get value out of it, I think the key component of our network and our technology capability is that we have to normalize everything, especially name, address, and now we are seeing more and more that with email and phone as well. If you do not normalize it, as you see the first two examples here on the address, the same address can be written in many different ways, right? And if you do not normalize it, hashing function will yield in two different entries for that, and we cannot accurately see the activity patterns. So the normalization is a very important function for us, and then it helps us keep our network secure for our customers.
Thanks, Vivek. And I know we've talked a lot about network signals and attributes. I think everyone probably has a fairly good example or idea of what data the network is surfacing for customers. If we zoom out a little bit, Vivek, can you speak to some of the other insights that we provide to our customers that they can use in their fraud risk models?
Yeah, sure. I think to Stacy's point, network signal is just one of the ways we provide value to our customers. We can see network-like signals. Network signals like these patterns are just one category of data. We also provide actual identity elements, their validity checks, match statuses. So let's say if you have name, phone, email, did the name match with the phone in our graph database, because that's where we have linkages? Did the name match with the email? Then we also provide risk flags scores. If whether the IP that we are seeing on this transaction, is it a risky IP, or is it something that is more trustable IP? Then we have enriched metadata around some of these elements. So for example, for phone, we will provide line type. What is the line type of this phone? So businesses then can take all this together and make informed risk decisions about their customers.
Great. And then can you give us like an example of like where in a customer workflow this data can be used? Like in particular for our audience today, are there areas where other payments companies have implemented or integrated our data within their workflows?
Yeah, sure. In most cases, we see a consumer provides information for a transaction. This can include details like name, email, address, phone, and IP. Then you can call our transaction risk API. This is, one of the key capability of that of our transaction risk API. It's a blazing fast speed, P99 of less than 100 millisecond globally in your fraud. And then the responses that we provide, you can either use them in your fraud models or rule-based systems to check whether this person's information is adding up and his behavior is legitimate. And this data can be used in a multi-layer risk strategy. As I said, the data returned in the API can be used in a machine learning model or even a rule-based system. Some of our payment customers use transaction risk API in a pre-auth model, as a pre-auth state, where they call us to verify an identity even before they run a credit check on that person.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Let's dive a little deeper. I know you mentioned transaction risk API. Can you kind of walk us through some of the signals that we're providing through the API? And apologies for a little bit of a misformat on this slide.
No issues, Stacy. So yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, we provide not just network signals. The ones that is highlighted in green are the new network signals that got added in Transaction Risk 2.0. But what we also provide is validity level of all the entries that you're providing. So let's say whether an email is actually valid or not, a phone number is actually valid or not, right? So we check that before we return back a response to you. We check the match to name, so whether email is matching to the name that's provided, the phone is matching to the name that's provided, and then we provide the metadata level, metadata about the entries that you have given us. So for example, line type of the phone, and then we have risk scores, right? So identity risk score, which is our all-up product risk score, and then identity network risk score, which is just based on the activity pattern, what is the risk score on this particular identity that has been submitted. And then you also see the new network attributes that got added. So for example, secondary email first seen days. My favorite one here is the pair combinations. When have you seen the phone and IP together in our network? That's one of the most predictive ones that we have released recently. So yeah, there's a lot of information here, and our customers are deriving value from it.
Thanks, Vivek. Let's just dive deeper into, as we're kind of wrapping things up, an example from a customer perspective. Vivek, do you want to speak to this payment service provider that we've been supporting and partnering with?
Sure, Stacy. In fact, we have been working with a payment service provider in China that was looking to reduce fraud and increase acceptance in the pre-auth model. The company implemented Transaction Risk API, found a lot of value in our identity risk score, email first seen days attribute, phone and email to name matches, and IP risk flag. Implementing Transaction Risk API resulted in increased approvals by 18.6% and reduced chargebacks by 17.3%. So to going back to the initial balancing act slide, where our customers are juggling how to identify more good customers as well as bad customers. These are the numbers that helps us in the product world here at Ekata. It helps us provide a good recognition of how our products are performing in the market.
Great, thank you. Thanks to you both, Stacy. So we do have a couple of questions that have come through here in the chat. The first question is, what are the common data points that your customers see the most value in Some examples would it be match statuses, risk flags, or scores? Can you answer that for us?
Yeah, I can start, and then Vivek, feel free to add in as you see fit. So I know there's a lot of companies that leverage our identity risk score that Vivek mentioned earlier, as well as we recently released, I think late last year. Gosh, time is just just all over the place these days. But our network score, which takes all of the insights from our network specifically and just looks at those activity patterns and provides a risk score around that. Email first seen has also been a really valuable tool for a lot of our customers, as well as the match statuses that you just mentioned as well, Heather. Vivek, anything to add?
Yeah, I will add this. It will really depend on the use case that you're using our products in. What we have seen, in just specifically talking about from transaction risk perspective, to Stacey's point, our risk scores do provide the most value to our customers. Then IP risk is another one, which helps us detect the origin of attack. So that's another one that our customers have found a lot of value from. Email first seen, it helps in, especially more so in a digital identity use case or digital goods use case, where you want to know the stability and validity of that email. That has helped there. So it will depend on your use case, and yeah, but I think I agree with Stacey in terms of risk scores being the top ones for transaction risk use case.
Great. So
Heather,
the next question.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Heather.
Yeah, so
I was just going to call out. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, Heather. I was just going to say I see a really good question here in terms of just an impact from another potential wave of COVID. Do you want to go ahead and address that question? Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah, not a problem. So, yeah, I see exactly what you're referring to. It looks like we have, as we head into maybe another wave with COVID globally, do you have any predictions for fraud? Where are there any specific areas that we should be paying attention to?
Vivek, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, the COVID world, what we are seeing, some of the new trends we are seeing from our customers is pick up at the curb, and there the address tumbling use case, address and email tumbling use case has been on the rise. And that is why we kind of expedited our investment in address risk product and released that last month, especially targeting for that. Then around email tumbling as well, we are hearing a lot of such feedback from our customers. So that is also becoming a problem. So we are keeping a watch on that as well, and to see how we can help our customers on that.
Thanks, Vivek. I would also add, and I think, it's somewhat unfortunate that this might be a growing problem, but even just friendly fraud, which is, typically a good consumer who might be practicing some fraudulent actions. I think, unfortunately, given the times and the current effects that the pandemic is having on the world, we definitely can anticipate some of that behavior as well from a user perspective.
Okay, thank you. So another question that I see here that came through, do you provide data for credit checks?
Yeah, so
I can take that.
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Vivek. I was just going to say, typically, we don't usually support credit check use cases. I think there are creative ways that our customers have come up with to vet out certain applications that might seem a little more high risk or low risk upfront before pushing them through a typical or traditional credit check workflow. But Vivek, feel free to add there as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. We do not provide credit check but how our customers use us is they call us first to verify the identity, and then they do the credit check. They have found it to be more efficient and more cost effective. So I mean, if there are more interests around that, we can provide you some case studies to help you understand how we are adding value for our customers in such scenarios.
Great. So here's another interesting question that has come through. How do GDPR and privacy laws affect the ability to secure data and prevent fraud? How related are they, and are there any key points or advice to keep in mind?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think that's the balancing act that we have to do in Ekata and the product team, where we want to derive as much value as we can from the data that our customers are submitting. But at the same time, we have to keep our infrastructure secure. There are many things that we have put in place to be compliant with that, starting with having data centers in those regions so that data movement is restricted. That's one of the asks in there. The other thing that we have done is encrypted the entire system using some of the industry-leading encryption methodologies, and then we had to hash everything in our system. That makes it a little more difficult for our data science teams because they are constantly, one of the tasks that they have is to constantly look at the data and find patterns, and having everything hashed just increases that barrier of innovation. It's that balancing act that you have to do, but we feel better about having a hash network. Now, at least that helps us secure our customers' data against any kind of future breach or attacks. So that would be one thing that I would highly recommend. Even on the surface, when we took on the hashing project, it seemed like we'll not be able to do any innovation after that. Not true. It does affect the pace of innovation a little bit, but you can continue to derive value from your data.
Great, thank you. I do see a couple of more questions. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A. What type of merchant would benefit from this service? Retail, e-commerce? Can you give some examples?
Well, we cater to e-commerce, travel, marketplaces, global payments, online lending. So anyone that has digital transaction where there's an identity from the other side of the firewall is trying to get something back from you, that is where you want to identify who's that person behind that transaction, because there are cases that you can be that could be fraudulent, or it could be the identity might have been used for nefarious purposes. So there are various set of use cases within digital transaction that we work on. Stacey, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vivek. I do just want to mention that these are the areas of focus for our business, but certainly are not limited to these verticals. And, on a similar note, no two risk models are the same. And I mentioned our customers can be really creative in terms of how they're addressing fraud and risk within their organizations. So depending on what inputs or elements that you're looking at and what you're looking to learn and gain more intelligence around, our data can help support that.
Thank you. And then looks like the final question that we have here, what is your global data coverage like? Do you have coverage in France?
Vivek, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I do. We operate globally. In fact, now we have offices in EMEA and APAC in Singapore. So Singapore, Amsterdam, Budapest, Seattle. We operate out of at least 4 different offices at this point. And we are catering to global customers. So by virtue of that, we have to have a global product. You will find our coverages especially on the matches, may differ in geography to geography. But in certain areas where we are focusing more, we try to keep our coverage rates up. I think specific to use case, this is another one that is specific to use case, and the countries that you operate in. We can give you a better picture of it if we connect on this offline.
Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you. So I believe that was the last question. I want to thank everyone for attending today and staying with us.